kind of cool, true story that is important to understanding the maritime history of Anguilla. If you look on the corner of the little store, you'll see a rock hanging on a piece of rope. Weird. That's a simple memorial of a ballast rock, typically with much bigger than that. There's one on the ground over there that played a very important part in our little history in 1796. So I'm turning the clock way back. All right? 1796, you have all kind of wars between the French and the British over all these little islands. Major stuff, because they're all trying to fight for plantation economies. And in 1744, a French invasion took place in Anguilla at Cartouche Bay and Crocus Bay, where the French commander was not very smart to choose a place like Cartouche Bay and Crocus Bay to attack with all the cliffs and hills and around. So the Anguillians, under a guy named Governor Hodge is a big name on Anguilla today, defended Anguilla, and all they had to do was pelt stones and conch shells and whatever it is and shoot a few muskets. And believe it or not, over 44 of the invading Frenchmen were killed, and that battle for Anguilla was over. The guy who ran the show, the guy who invaded Anguilla, was a Monsieur de la Touche. Check the name of the beach, Cartouche Bay. So in 1796, a couple of years later during the Napoleonic Wars, the French said, hey, we gotta go get them fellas some licks. And the French invaded Anguilla again with two battleships in those days, frigates, one called Le Decius and one called Le Valiant. And this time they were much smarter. They landed in Rendezvous, which was a much nicer place to start a fight, because Rendezvous is not that easily defended. Now, we had a governor at that time called Benjamin Gums, big Anguillian name. But Benjamin Gums, in my estimation, had to have about 10 screws loose. He was not smart. What he had with him was a very smart young Anguillian who noticed a key thing before the battle started. He noticed that the French had gotten all their gunpowder wet. You remember in those days, to fire a musket, you had to take a little piece of gunpowder, put it in a little piece of paper, ram it down a musket, and then the musket had a flint. So when you pulled the trigger and the flint sparked, you would light the gunpowder and zoom, right? So all the gunpowder got wet, and what the French did was they put a set of sails out on the beach to dry the gunpowder, because white gunpowder can't work. So this very smart Anguillian went to Governor Gums and said, hey, we got this covered. All we have to do is throw fire sticks in the gunpowder and we got them cool. Because if we burn up all the gunpowder, that's the end of the story. Nope. Benjamin Gums' famous remark was, this is a fair fight. We're going to wait till they get the gunpowder dry and then we're going to get them blows. Big mistake. So as the history books tell us, the French, of course, had a much better force. They overwhelmed the Anguillian defense force. They went into what was then Blown Point, not Blowing Point. They burnt Blowing Point flat. They moved into the valley. They destroyed most of the valley. They burnt the original St. Mary's Church. And then they headed, backing the Anguillians back up into what is now Sandy Hill. And if you go to Sandy Hill, you see that awful building on the top of the hill. That was built by the government. There was a little fort there. And the Anguillians started to make their last defense. And they cut off, if you ever seen a fry net go to Island Harbor or wherever, and you see fishermen throwing a fry net, you will notice that the fry net has little balls of lead on the end of the fry net to catch the fry, for the net to sink. Now, everybody calls, wherever you have fry nets all over the world, and they're all over the world. They call fry net lead sinkers. In Anguilla, right through to the 1960s, the sinkers on a fry net were called bullets, simply because they used them in 1796 for the last defense. Anyway, the things were going really rough for us, and Governor Benjamin Gomes did the one smart thing, and he had a little schooner, a small schooner, anchored in Sandy Hill Bay, and he sent the schooner Alice to look for help in St. Kitts. And the Alice took off for St. Kitts on a long reach. If you look at Sandy Hill and you could see St. Kitts on a clear day, you can see that it's one tack. You don't have to tack much if the wind is right. And the Alice took off full speed for St. Kitts. On the way to St. Kitts, her boom began to break. And that is the boom that, if you know sailing boats, the piece of wood, you can see it in the model of the Warspite inside if you're finished. The boom helps to hold the sails full. The boom is made of wood. The boom began to break, or the boom, in seaman's terms, the boom began to spring. In their fear that the boom would spring, the normal thing would be to drop the sail, but they couldn't drop the sails. They were rushing to get help. So what they did was they ran below and they got a huge rock, ballast rock, they tied it with rope, boom. And they hung it out on the end of the boom to counterbalance where the break of the boom was and keep the boom so that it wouldn't break off altogether and collapse the sail. And sure enough, it worked. Boom, they got into St. Kitts, and they found a British man of war called HMS Lapwing. And HMS Lapwing immediately raised anchor and set sail for Anguilla. If you go to Sandy Ground today, if you were here long before the revolution, if you've been here since 1796, you will see that nearly all government boats were called Lapwing. And there's a reason for that. So when the Lapwing came in through Flat Island and St. Martin, the French retreated quickly back to Rendezvous and jumped on board Ladicius and Le Valiant. But the Lapwing caught Ladicius and Le Valiant, forced Ladicius onto a reef in Marigot and destroyed that, and Le Valiant surrendered. Battle of Anguilla was over. Now, the story didn't end there. When they were cleaning up the island, in the old Wall Blake house, which still stands, but not the building that you see on top, no, but the original Wall Blake house that was burnt flat during the revolution, during the invasion, they found the body of a cripple, an Anguillian who had lost the use of his legs. Well, some people thought he was a cripple, some people thought he was just silly. But he was affectionately known as, somebody in the community that you took care of because he was handicapped, severely handicapped. And the French had bayoneted him and killed him in Wall Blake House. And oh God, everybody went nuts. The French army that had to surrender was imprisoned up at Crocus Bay. If you go up to Crocus Bay now, you will see Crocus Hill, you will see a very good philanthropist is rebuilding the old courthouse. Mr. Taylor, he needs a lot. He needs to be congratulated for what he's doing. Underneath the courthouse were the prisons, and a lot of Frenchmen were imprisoned in the courthouse, and then they found this dead Anguillian in the ruins of Wall Blake House, and everybody went crazy. And they went up to Crocus Hill, and they put the muskets right through the bars, and they shot out all these French sailors and soldiers. Oh Lord, wickedness. And they buried them in St. Mary's Anglican churchyard. Now, the key thing about that story, from our perspective, from boat building, from boat sailing, is the rock. The ballast rock has always been a key thing in anything to do with maritime history in Anguilla. It's crucial to everything and was crucial right up to the 1980s for our racing tradition. All the racing boats had to have the ballast rocks and the leads and the sand. Without ballast rocks, ain't no boat race. Nowadays, of course, we melt lead and put lead into each room in a specific place. So this voyage of the Alice and the rescue of the Lapwing was key to our little history. Kind of brutal, kind of rough, but true story. So I flipped that. Now, that story helps you to understand a little more about Anguilla and understand where we've been, but let me flip to something a little more amusing. True to a certain degree. I had an uncle. My uncle, too, was from a very big seafaring family. He is the son of the guy who built the Warspite, my grandfather, the model in there. His name was William Elliott Carty. And he built the biggest schooner on Anguilla. Biggest schooner ever built on Anguilla. 95 feet long, right there on Sandy Ground where you see the lit lounges today. The Liberator was built, the biggest schooner of Anguilla. On her second voyage, taking Anguillians to Curacao, she ran aground on Borneo and was totally lost. Everybody was saved, no one drowned, but it was a disaster to him and his own family because, of course, that was a huge investment on his part. But it goes to show how important the maritime history was to us, where we could build something as big as that, and how important it was in carrying Anguillians to look for work in Curacao and Aruba in the 1930s and 40s, when emigration, people going overseas to Curacao and Aruba and then to the Virgin Islands, kept Anguillian society afloat. So here's the funny part. So I'm 11 years old. My father is working in St. Kitts. My father was a clergyman. So I came home for Christmas holidays. And I go to Sandy Ground because I lived in Sandy Ground. Sandy Ground was where the boats are, Sandy Ground was where the sea is. So there's nothing more fun than that for an 11-year-old. And I couldn't get home to my aunt's place that night. They wouldn't let me go. We were having so much fun. So my cousin and I sat with this uncle of mine, and he started to tell some stories. So now remember, we are 11 years old. The first story was, he was also a big fisherman. He went to Prickly Pear one day. Now, if you've been to Prickly Pear, you will notice that there are two little islands off the north coast of Prickly Pear. They're called big floats and little floats. You're laughing. So little floats is the one that's closest to the Prickly Pear beach. And both floats were places that they used to go to catch snappers. So he's telling us about this trip he went to floats all by himself on this boat. And it's 8 o'clock at night. There's no electricity in Anguilla in those days, so we have a lantern lit on the dining table, and he's in a big chair with his legs cocked up, giving us his story. And he tells us that he's sailing up to Little Floats, and he meets a mermaid tanning on the rock. Wow, a mermaid, yeah. Then he tells us that the mermaid had a shark's jawbone, and with which she was combing her hair. So, of course, little boys, what? Is this for real? So he goes on and on and on, and then he tells us that the mermaid flipped off the rock, jumped into the sea, and was just about to teach him how to kiss underwater. At this time, we really got interested and started asking questions, and at which point he said, "Boy, you're too young. Go to sleep." And he packed us both off to bed. Now, I've never forgotten that story. Why? Partly because it was so silly, partly because, yes, my uncle was pulling our legs as much as he could. But at the same time, I could see over the years, interwoven into that, the whole culture and maritime history of Anguilla. Boats, sea stories, myths. And since then, you would be amazed the myths and stories that have come across to us from, not just in Anguilla, but from across the Eastern Caribbean, on mysterious things to do with mythology, superstitions. And superstitions in boats were rife right up to 20 years ago. Even here in Rebel Marine, in one of the boats we launched, the ladies couldn't touch the boat before it was launched. If a woman touched a boat before it was launched, big trouble. So thank God that myth has died away, and you ladies are more than welcome to climb on board any boat we build. So I draw that story simply to show you how this part of our culture is interwoven into Anguilla's history and is key to who we are today. The last one is not as funny or interesting, but key too. Since just last week we celebrated Anguilla Day, the history of the revolution, a lot of people completely overlook the fact that when the revolution, here we have Olive, when the revolution started at the Queen Show, February 4th, 1967, when the Bush War started between February 4th, 1967 and May 30th, 1967, when all the rebels were harassing the police force in the valley, sneaking into the bushes outside where the Secretariat is and where ABC is today, in all that bush, and firing shots at the police and the gun warfare that went on. The Anguillians recognized that the St. Kitts police and their military help had more firepower than we did. So, with the help of Kenneth Harrigan, an Anguillian boat, the Oceanic, went to St. Thomas to buy guns, or to get guns. That was so successful because everybody in St. Thomas seemed to have been rushing down to the waterfront and giving them guns to fight the Anguilla fight. But of course, the St. Kitts police also knew that this was happening in St. Thomas. So they were preparing for the Oceanic, knowing full well that the Oceanic was going to smuggle guns. But thankfully, the rebels also knew that the police knew. So what did they do? They secretly transferred all the guns to the Baby Mac. The Baby Mac, another schooner, built in Blowing Point, by Anguillians, by, I think, McConnor, by McConnor, was crucial in now diverting and diverging the whole plan and bringing the guns to St. Martin and not to Anguilla, from where they were then transported one night, couple nights later, back to Anguilla, arming the rebels and enabling the ejection of the Kittitian police on May 30th, hence the revolution. So sometimes today when we look at our history, Anguillian history, we forget and we overlook, and it's no one's fault. It's just life has changed. We have a much more sophisticated economy now. We have a much more diverse economy, diversified economy, all the rest of that. But anywhere you look into our past, you will see an indelible mark of maritime work, of schooner building, sloop building, smuggling, rigging, all the marine arts and all the trades that helped to keep this little place in body and soul for 300 years when it was a marginal colony. If you look in the colonial records, Anguilla is described as a marginal colony. A marginal colony simply means a worthless colony. It can't grow sugar. It's not worth the empire anything. But in that marginalization, Anguillians were able to survive, and most of their survival was thanks to their willingness to struggle, fight with the sea, to command the marine arts, and to make Anguilla what it was, what it is today. So that's my 3 stories. Avanella, I have done how many now? Am I done?
You haven't done enough.
I've done enough?
No.
Oh, yes.
At this time, anybody has any questions that they would like to have have Mr. Carty answer? This is your time to do it, to ask. If you do, I'll bring you the mic so that everybody can hear you. Any questions, anybody?
Yes, Olive.
Hold on, one moment, Massage.
Have you heard or do you know where the guns slept that night?
In your place?
My two boys, Kennedy and Gary, when they came from school, they were barred from their bedroom. And they wanted to know why can't they go there? They have to take off their school clothes and put on their home clothes. But you can't go in there. Why not? Well, you cannot go. You just cannot go. The door was locked. And the guns were all in there. And I think it was the morning after that the British ship came in Island Harbor.
Yeah, Salisbury.
The Salisbury.
Yeah.
And the night, Atlin and I buried every one of those guns.
Buried them?
Up Johnstone on the beach. we buried them all night, and when you finish, we pulled the sand, the dirty sand back over the thing. Up to now, I think there's a blanket that we put a blanket
over them.
And we put the guns in the blanket and we cover them over and then we cover them over with sand. It was a strange thing. The children, why we can't go in our bedroom? We have to change our clothes, but you can't go.
How many guns you had, Ali?
Huh?
How many guns you had?
Quite a lot.
200, 300?
It wasn't that many, but it was a lot of guns.
Enough.
Yeah, but I mean, we didn't count them. You know, they just brought them in and they brought them down from Captain's Bay.
Captain's Bay, right, yeah.
So, if you didn't take count of how many guns you had, how did you know you retrieved all of them?
Well, we couldn't count them, but I wasn't going to count them. I don't know if any of the men counted them, but I know they were brought in the house and we protected them. Okay. But I can't tell you they were 30, 50, but they were quite a bit.
And 50 years after we have these guns now.
I didn't want to allude to it. I didn't want to allude to it, especially because we're taping, but there's a possibility that guns are somewhere buried.
Then they formed an Anguillan. David, you would know that. They formed an Anguillan artillery, whatever you would call that. They had their gang, you know. So they are the ones.
Any other questions? No?
And some of the policemen were ejected. Some of them were taken out from the airport. Some of them had to go on the same waspite back to St. Kitts. So here again, the schooners and sloops.
The 30th of May, they all, well, a lot of people march over to the police station, tell the police they have to go. And they took their ammunition and their guns, and they send them empty-handed back up.
The point is, when you look at the revolution, there's a lot of little things behind the revolution and why the revolution succeeded that we tend to overlook. And kind of. Any more questions?
Yes, Mr. Carty, just before Andy comes and we go for second to last tour again, an invitation is extended to everybody to do a half-hour tour. That is a very enriching tour of Rebel Marine. We have one at 4:30 and 5:30. Everybody who has been on all three tours beforehand have been totally amazed and glad that they made the sacrifice. But Mr. Carty, in terms of, let's say, a favorite boat or most, I think maybe the word would be unorthodox boat that you have built. Can you tell us a story about that? And then we will...
One of our boats?
Yes, design.
Well,
yes.
Yes, you're right. It'll have to be two cheers.
Of
Course, Rebel is a very affectionate little boat because it started everything. But Two Cheers was the most unique boat we've done. We've done a lot more sophisticated boats since then, more technical and all the rest of that. But Two Cheers was very unique in that it had nothing on her was straight or flat. She was all a series of compound curves. Every part of her was a sweep, a curve, a compound, whatever it was. And she was very, very successful. She is not just that she was a good-looking boat or she was a uniquely designed boat, but she made her owners quite wealthy. And she was a very, very successful boat. And she revolutionized the channel between Anguilla and St. Martin and how people got from here to there. Because I was saying this morning at the other story, before Two Cheers, to go to St. Martin, you had to get down to Blowing Point at 9 o'clock, jump on the Silver Still with goats and lobsters and completely exposed to the rain, the wind, the sea, And if you got to St. Martin, you get to St. Martin like 5 to 10, 10 to 10. And 1 o'clock, whether you finished shopping or not, the Silver Still was heading back to Anguilla. And if you missed the Silver Still, that was it. You're sleeping in St. Martin at night. And the 2 Cheers revolutionized that. The 2 Cheers came and had a trip every hour across the channel. And in 1 year, she did 50,000 miles, 2 revolutions around the planet, just running across, non-stop, Anguilla St. Martin. So she was a very, very successful boat, especially for our owners. And yeah, it was a very unique experience.
Can you tell us what other boats Rebel Marine have built that facilitated the ferry service between us?
Well, right after that, she was so successful that we built the Big Bird right after that, then the Mystic, then the Shauna, then the Excellence. The Excellence was really, really nice boat. The Excellence was here when the Queen came there. When the Queen came to visit Anguilla, she came to see the Excellence right here in the yard. She was, and she's still running.
Yes, she is.
Yeah, she's still running. But yeah, Cheers was kind of cool.
Could I give you a weird story that happened that my husband told me about that happened?
One moment, Mrs. Summer.
I thought of it when you were talking about that episode where the chap fell overboard, the cook.
Yeah.
Well, my husband, Walter Hodge, Excelsior, was coming from Curacao. And dark at night, and the cook was a man called Geddes Webster. Nashville was in government one time, his father. Yeah. And he went to throw the water overboard that he had in a bucket or something, and he fell overboard. Mid all dark night, the boats going sailing, plowing the water, and luckily they had a fishing line out to catch a fish. And on the way they said, someone said, "Oh, we got a fish." So they pulled in the line, and luckily it was the man. When he went overboard, luckily he boot on to the line, and he held it. So his hand slipped all the way down to the hook, and the hook caught him. And when they pulled it up, there was Geddes, and they pulled him a thing in it. I remember seeing his hand. He came down by my mother to show us the cut. His hand, the hook went right through his hand. But he was saved by a fishing line in the middle of the night between Curacao and that is hundreds of feet of water, depth of water. So it just shows that there are wonderful stories and wonderful things that happen. And he was like a miracle. Everybody went. He came to our show in Anguilla and Island Harbor. Everybody went up to see him because he was like a miracle man, Well, that's just a little story.
Yes, Mr. Carty, I must compliment you and Tijabanet and everybody who brought about this today for you to be telling the younger generations about the history of Anguilla. Because lots of things we take for granted. Because even though when the revolution was, I was about 14 years old, I can identify with the things that were being said, all what Olive is here saying, even about whoever's Geddes and whatever, and so I hope and pray that our young people will continue to carry on the work that was started and don't think that Anguilla will just come like this. To struggles people went and risked their lives. I recall picking up that book Calvin Petty wrote, when the men were guarding the beach? And when I look and I see those men on the beach, lying on their stomachs and guarding the beach, to look to see when the boats or whatever come in. And now to see what is happening. There's still hope, We just have to tell our young people there's a better way, Thanks.
Yep.
All right, if there are no final questions or comments from Mr. Carty, we have come to the end of his story with Mr. David Carty for today. He started at 12, 2, and 4, and he has also allowed us he he's consented to us coming here and commandeering, overtaking a Rebel Marine boatyard space, and he will not make a big ado about it, but very few people will shut down their business for a day to facilitate such. And so I'm going to ask you to please give him a hand clap of thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'll say it again. He's one person I will pay money to hear speak, because he speaks from the heart, not just from the head. He speaks from the heart. And so our Rebel Marine Tour Day continues, and they just arrived. So if you want to do the tour, and even if you've got to miss something else, I'm going to highly recommend you do the tour. If you don't like the tour, you can come back and tell me, and I'll give you a banana bread. But don't lie. Do not lie. Don't lie. Okay, Rollins, don't lie. You go by the tour tree. We have a tour tree, and that's where we start the tour. And Andy, who Mr. Carty has brought under his wing from 1997, I ate one of them. He's my brother actually as well. He's gonna give you a tour, and then there's free drink, lime squash and ginger iced tea. There's banana bread. There is carrot cake. There is crack conch, fried cake, fried fish. Everything over there is just absolutely good. So now is your time to go head over to the tree tour and enjoy. We have one more tour at 5:30, and if
One more tour?
yeah, one more tour at 5:30.
But
For those,
your mama is there.
sorry, by the tree tour. The tour tree or the tree tour? Which one? The tour tree. Yeah, tour tree. And thanks everybody for coming. I will be signing books if you need me to by the table, the book signing table. A tree or the tree tour? Which one? The tour tree. Yeah, tour tree.
Stories filled with creatively woven images and facts. From the shores of Sandy Ground and Willa, boatmen sails through the real-life motivational stories of David Carty and Garfield Richardson. Bathed in humor and pivoting around the themes of resilience, cultural preservation, and entrepreneurship, the book resounds with the core and Ghanaian values of hard work, determination, and commitment. Boatman possesses a capacity to inspire the young, engage the academic, intrigue the philosopher, excite the historian, and catch leisurely readers hook, line, and sinker. Boatman, the first book in the Sandy Ground Tales series written by Avanella Griffith. Boatman is a compilation of two exciting and uniquely illustrated stories filled with creatively woven images and facts. From the shores of Sandy Ground and Willa, Boatman sails through the real-life motivational stories of David Carty and Garfield Richardson. Bathed in humor and pivoting around the themes of resilience, cultural preservation, and entrepreneurship, the book resounds with the core and Ghanaian values of hard work, determination, and commitment. Boatman possesses a capacity to inspire the young, engage the academic, intrigue the philosopher, excite the historian, and catch leisurely readers hook, line, and sinker. Boatman, the first book